For just the second time since the global AIDS epidemic began, HIV has been eliminated from a patient's body. Is a cure for the deadly virus in sight?
Welcome to Plain English, the podcast that goes at the right speed for English language learners. Listen now and read the transcript online at plainenglish.com. Now, here's Jeff, your host for today's episode.
12 years ago, a patient named Timothy Ray Brown was cured of HIV. Scientists have been trying since then to replicate the cure, but they have been unsuccessful until now. On today's episode, we'll talk about the London patient, the second person in the world to have seen off HIV. Welcome back to Plain English. I'm Jeff. JR is the producer, and this is the best podcast for learning English. That's because we go at a slower than normal pace so you can understand everything that is being said. You know, I bet most of you know more English than you think you do. What you need is to practice listening, recognizing a word, understanding it, and remembering it. But that is so hard to do when listening at full speed. By the time you recognize one word, you've missed 2 or 3 more. And that's why we go a little slower here, to give you a little extra time to recognize the words and remember them. Depending on where you are in your learning journey, you might also appreciate the transcripts on our website. Today is episode number 137, so you can see the transcript at plainenglish.com/137. Remember, you can join our email list by visiting plainenglish.com/mail, M-A-I-L, and entering your details in there. If you join the email list, you'll get free resources along with every episode. I was a little late sending them out last week, but I got them out eventually. You can also connect with me on WhatsApp. Just send a WhatsApp message to +1 312 967 8757. A patient in London appears to have been cured of HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. If true, he would be just the second person in history to have been cured since the global epidemic emerged in 1981. The first case of a man cured of HIV was 12 years ago, and scientists have been trying to replicate the cure since then. They have been unsuccessful until now. A group of scientists published a paper last week in the medical journal Nature describing what happened. Officially, they are not calling it a cure. Instead, they are saying it's a long-term remission, meaning that the virus has not appeared in a long time. Still, it would be a breakthrough in the fight against AIDS, a disease that has caused the deaths of almost 40 million people in less than 40 years. Let's take a quick step back. HIV is the human immunodeficiency virus. It is the virus that causes AIDS. When fully developed, AIDS attacks specific parts of your immune system that make it difficult for you to fight off routine infections. If you have the disease, your body cannot fight off common bacteria that cause no harm to others. People who die from having AIDS typically die from having been infected over and over with common bacteria and viruses. About half the people who develop AIDS die from it. Many of them are in Africa. In some African countries, over 15% of the adult population is infected with HIV. There is no cure for AIDS and no reliable way to kill the HIV virus, even with the latest news. However, people diagnosed with HIV no longer face a death sentence like they did in the 1980s and 1990s. Advances in antiretroviral drugs mean that people infected with HIV can live long, healthy lives, never pass along HIV to their partners, and never develop AIDS as long as they can afford their medication, which many people in the West now can. Even so, a cure for HIV would be most welcome. That brings us to last week's news. The patient, who is being called the London patient because he prefers anonymity, had both HIV and blood cancer. The treatment for his blood cancer was a bone marrow transplant. Bone marrow is the soft tissue inside your bones, and this is the part of your body that generates new blood cells. Plenty of people with HIV have gotten bone marrow transplants over the years and have continued to have HIV. But this case was different. In this case, the patient's doctors suggested that he use a bone marrow donor with a special type of genetic mutation, which is to say, they chose a donor that had a variation in his or her genes that most people do not have. This mutation actually changes certain parts of the cells in your immune system. Specifically, there is a protein in your immune cells called CCR5. The HIV virus uses this CCR5 protein to get into the immune system cells. Now, all viruses need to get into a host cell. Without being able to get into the immune cells, HIV would not replicate itself. But here is the key. HIV cannot get into a host cell in people who have this one specific genetic mutation. That's why people with this mutation don't get HIV in the first place. And when people with this mutation donate their bone marrow to an HIV-positive patient, the patient's immune system gradually clears itself of HIV because the newly generated cells don't let the virus take hold. This is confusing, so let's talk about it a little more. Remember that your bone marrow is where you produce new blood cells. As the patient's brand new bone marrow starts producing more cells, those new cells are immune to the HIV virus. Because your cells are dying and being replaced all the time, the patient's immune system is eventually comprised only of cells made by his new bone marrow, and none of his immune system would be affected by HIV. That is what scientists discovered, and that is how both the first patient 12 years ago and the second patient most recently have been cured of HIV. A bone marrow transplant, however, is not a practical treatment for the average person that is HIV positive. For one thing, only about 1 in 1,000 people of European descent has this particular mutation. It's even rarer among other populations. So there are not a lot of people who can be the donors. What's more, a bone marrow transplant is risky in and of itself. It is a rigorous, draining, and risky procedure that you would not want to do unless you absolutely needed it. In order to have this transplant, you actually have to kill all your existing bone marrow. Because it is so dangerous, doctors would not be willing or able to do bone marrow transplants just to cure patients of HIV. In a way, the so-called cure would be worse than the disease. There is one other caveat. Not all HIV viruses are the same. In fact, another strain of HIV actually doesn't enter the immune system via CCR5, but via another protein called CXCR4. Still, this is a missing piece of the puzzle. With this new discovery, scientists at least know how 2 people have been cured of HIV, and they can now focus research on finding gene therapies that can cause this CCR5 mutation in people who were not born with it. The first patient to be cured is named Timothy Ray Brown. He was happy to hear the news of a second patient cured. Here's what he said about it. He said, "If something has happened once in medical science, it can happen again. I've been waiting for company for a long time." I want to say thank you to a few people in the audience who took a look at the text of this episode before I recorded it. It's well documented by now that I'm no expert at science, so I asked some of my WhatsApp contacts if anyone knew about genetics and such. And I got a few volunteers to read the text and make sure that I got my facts right. So I want to say thank you to Guy, Boris, Andrea, and Flaviana for taking a look. And I was telling a few people on WhatsApp that I got some volunteers to help me. And here's what Luciana from Brazil said when she heard that people were helping me out. She told me that Plain English has the best audience in the world. And that is just spot on. All I had to do was say I needed some help from people who knew about genetics, and here I get scientists, doctors, engineers, all volunteering to help. You guys really are the best audience in the world. Luciana is exactly right. I wanted to remind you real quick about our partner, Mosalingua. They have innovative programs for helping you get better at English, including a program called Mosa Speak, which is all about pronunciation. You can learn all about what Mosalingua has to offer by visiting plainenglish.com/learn. It's been a while since we've done a phrasal verb, and today we have a good one, fight off. We all know what to fight means, but to fight off means to fight to defend yourself from something that is attacking you. Your immune system fights off bacteria and viruses all the time. Bacteria are everywhere. They were on the keyboard I used to write this, and they're all over the microphone I'm using to record it. They're in your house, on public transportation, on your pets, and the other people in your life are just covered with all kinds of bacteria. That's usually okay because your body has an immune system that fights off all these bacteria. Your immune system fights to defend you from all kinds of potentially dangerous bacteria and viruses. But people who develop AIDS have difficulty fighting off those bacteria. People with AIDS cannot defend themselves against attack from even the most common everyday bacteria. They cannot fight it off. Here are a few more examples with fight off. A person might fight off an attacker. If someone comes at you on the street trying to rob you, it's probably best to just give that person what they want. But if you're brave and you think you can, you might try to fight off the attacker. You might try to defend yourself forcefully from that attack. Defend yourself by fighting. Here's a headline I saw in the news. A grandmother used a scooter to fight off masked attackers. Maybe it was one of those electric scooters we talked about in episode 47. Regardless, good for her. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in trouble. There will be elections in October of this year, and Trudeau will have to fight off the Conservative Party if he wants to stay in power. He has been beset by a number of scandals lately, so the opposition party will be going after him. He'll try to fight off the challenge to his leadership and stay in office in the elections later this year. There was a surfer in the U.S. state of Oregon who was out to catch some early morning waves this month when he encountered a shark that was headed his way. Luckily, he was able to fight off the shark. He hit the shark over the head with his surfboard and then swam for dear life. Fortunately, he got back to shore unharmed. His surfboard was another story. The shark's bite marks were still in it, and it was cracked where the surfer smacked his board over the shark's head. Good thing he was able to fight off that attacking shark. That is one lucky surfer. And on that note, we will wrap up for today. Thanks for being part of the best audience in the world. You really are, and I really do love hearing from you on WhatsApp, especially when you send voice messages. Don't be shy. +1 312 967 87 57. And remember the number one rule. Someone broke this again just yesterday. No apologizing for your English. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you back here on Monday. Here's a hint. A lot of you liked the Toronto episode. Monday's episode is also about a place, a very special place from my childhood. I bet you'll like it. See you then.